Did you ever watch The Patriot and wonder, amidst the sweeping battle scenes and Mel Gibson's fiery speeches, just how much of that story was actually ripped from the history books? I mean, we've all been there, right? You get swept up in the drama, the heroism, the sheer cinematic spectacle, and you think, wow, that's incredible, but did that really happen? Because let's be honest, The Patriot isn't just your average war movie. It's an emotional roller coaster, a tale of a reluctant hero forced into a brutal conflict, a story that paints a vivid, often visceral picture of the American Revolution. But how much of that picture is a genuine reflection of the past, and how much is Hollywood magic, designed to tug at our heartstrings and fill cinema seats? We're going to dive deep today, separating the fact from the fiction, the historical accuracy from the dramatic license, and try to answer that burning question, how much of The Patriot is real? First, let's establish the context. The Patriot was released in 2000, directed by Roland Emmerich, and starring Mel Gibson as Benjamin Martin, a widowed South Carolina planter who reluctantly takes up arms against the British during the American Revolutionary War. The film portrays a brutal conflict, showcasing guerrilla warfare, atrocities on both sides, and the struggle for independence. Now, let's start with the big one, Benjamin Martin himself. Is he a real historical figure? The answer is a resounding, sort of. Benjamin Martin is a fictional composite character. He draws inspiration from several real individuals, most notably Francis Marion, also known as the Swamp Fox. Marion was a master of guerrilla warfare, utilizing the terrain of the South Carolina swamps to harass and disrupt British supply lines. However, the film significantly alters Marion's character. While Marion was undoubtedly a skilled military leader, he was also a slave owner and had a reputation for brutality, including instances of targeting and killing Native Americans. The film, perhaps understandably, sanitizes Marion's character, portraying Martin as a reluctant hero motivated primarily by the defense of his family and liberty. This is where the first major divergence from historical accuracy occurs. The film presents a simplified, almost romanticized version of the complexities of the Revolutionary War, particularly regarding the issue of slavery. While the film briefly acknowledges the presence of slavery, it doesn't delve into the deep contradictions inherent in fighting for liberty while owning other human beings. Now, let's talk about the tactics. The film accurately depicts the use of guerrilla warfare by the American colonists. The use of hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and the exploitation of local knowledge were crucial to the American war effort, especially in the Southern theater. The British, accustomed to traditional European warfare, struggled to adapt to these unconventional methods. The film also portrays the brutality of the war, including the burning of churches and the killing of civilians. The British, particularly under the command of Colonel William Tavington, played by Jason Isaacs, are depicted as ruthless and merciless. While Tavington is a fictional character, he embodies some of the more brutal aspects of British military conduct during the war. The burning of churches, for example, was a real tactic employed by the British, often to disrupt rebel gatherings or to retaliate against local resistance. The killing of civilians, while not as widespread as depicted in the film, did occur, and the war in the South was particularly brutal, characterized by partisan warfare and a cycle of violence. One of the most controversial aspects of the film is the depiction of the massacre at the church. This scene, where British soldiers lock civilians inside a church and set it ablaze, is a particularly harrowing moment. While such atrocities did occur during the war, the specific incident depicted in the film is fictional. However, the film does accurately portray the psychological impact of war on civilians. The fear, the uncertainty, and the constant threat of violence were a reality for many people living in the colonies during the Revolution. The film effectively conveys the sense of desperation and the willingness to fight for survival that drove many colonists to take up arms. Another point of contention is the portrayal of the British Army. The film often depicts the British as a monolithic force of evil, with little nuance or complexity. While the British Army did commit atrocities, it was also a professional and well-equipped force, and many British soldiers were simply doing their duty. The film also simplifies the motivations of the colonists. While the desire for liberty was undoubtedly a driving force, the war was also fueled by economic factors, social tensions, and regional rivalries. The film tends to focus on the ideal of liberty, neglecting the more complex and often contradictory motivations of the colonists. Let's discuss some of the smaller details. The clothing, the weaponry, and the tactics depicted in the film are generally accurate. The use of flintlock muskets, bayonets, and cannons is consistent with the period. The film also accurately portrays the importance of logistics and supply lines in warfare. The depiction of Charleston and the surrounding countryside is also generally accurate. The film was shot on location in South Carolina, and the scenery and architecture reflect the period. The film also accurately portrays the importance of the Southern theater in the Revolutionary War. One of the more dramatic and heavily fictionalized elements is the final battle. The climactic confrontation between Martin and Tavington is a cinematic spectacle, but it bears little resemblance to actual historical events. The battle scenes, while visually impressive, are often exaggerated and unrealistic. The film also takes liberties with the timeline of events. The war in the South was a complex and protracted conflict, and the film simplifies and compresses events for dramatic effect. The timeline of the film is not entirely accurate to the events of the war. So, where does that leave us? How much of The Patriot is real? The answer, as with many historical films, is a mixed bag. The film draws inspiration from real events and real individuals, but it also takes significant liberties with the historical record. The film effectively conveys the brutality and the emotional impact of the Revolutionary War, but it also simplifies and romanticizes the conflict. It portrays a simplified version of events, glossing over the more complex and controversial aspects of the war, especially the issue of slavery. It's crucial to remember that historical films, like The Patriot, can be a valuable tool for sparking interest in history. They can bring historical events to life and make them more accessible to a wider audience. However, it's also important to approach these films with a critical eye, recognizing their limitations and their potential for distortion. It's a film that sparks discussion, that makes you think, and that, hopefully, encourages you to delve deeper into the history of the American Revolution. The film is a starting point, not an ending point, to understanding that pivotal period in American history. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.